The Antiquities of the Jews, Volume 3, by Flavius Josephus. Book 13, Chapters 5 and 6. Chapter 5. How Trypho, after he had beaten Demetrius, delivered the kingdom to Antiochus, the son of Alexander, and gained Jonathan for his assistant, and concerning the actions and embassies of Jonathan. Now there was a certain commander of Alexander's forces, an Apenninian by birth, whose name was Diodotus, and was also called Trypho, took notice the ill will of the soldiers bare to Demetrius, and went to Malchus the Arabian, who brought up Antiochus, the son of Alexander, and told him what ill will the army bare Demetrius, and persuaded him to give him Antiochus, because he would make him king, and recover to him the kingdom of his father. Malchus at first opposed him in this attempt, because he kingdom of his father. Malchus at first opposed him in this attempt, because he could not believe him. But when Trypho laid hard at him for a long time, he over-persuaded him to comply with Trypho's intentions and entreaties. And this was the state Trypho was now in. But Jonathan the high priest, being desirous to get clear of those that were in the citadel of Jerusalem, and of the Jewish deserters and wicked men, as well as of those in all the garrisons in the country, sent presents and ambassadors to Demetrius, and entreated him to take away his soldiers out of the strongholds of Judea. Demetrius made answer that after the war, which he was now deeply engaged in, was over, he would not only grant him that, but greater things than that also. And he desired that he would send him some assistance, and informed him that his army had deserted him. So Jonathan chose out 3,000 of his soldiers. Now the people of Antioch hated Demetrius, both on account of what mischief he had done himself them, and because they were enemies also on account of his father Demetrius, who had greatly abused them. So they watched some opportunity which they might lay hold on to fall upon him. And when they were informed of the assistance that was coming to Demetrius from Jonathan, and considered at the same time that he would raise a numerous army, unless they prevented him, and seized upon him, they took their weapons immediately, and encompassed his palace in the way of a siege, and seizing upon all the things of getting out, they sought to subdue their king. And when he saw that the people of Antioch were become his bitterest enemies, and that they thus were in arms, he took the mercenary soldiers which he had with them, and those Jews who were sent by Jonathan, and assaulted the Antiochians. But he was overpowered by them, for they were many 10,000. But when the Jews saw that the Antiochians were superior, they went up to the top of the palace, and shot at them from thence. And because they were so remote from them by their height, that they suffered nothing on their side, but did great execution on the others, as fighting from such an elevation, they drove them out of the adjoining houses, and immediately set them on fire, whereupon the flame spread itself over the whole city and burnt it all down. This happened by reason of the closeness of the houses, and because they were generally built of wood. So the Antiochians, when they were not able to help themselves, nor to stop the fire, were put to flight. And as the Jews leaped from the top of one house to the top of another, and pursued them after that manner, it thence happened that the pursuit was so very surprising. But when the king saw that the Antiochians were busy in saving their children and their wives, and so did not fight any longer, he fell upon them in the narrow passages, and fought them, and slew a great many of them, till at last they were forced to throw down their arms, and to deliver themselves up to Demetrius. So he forgave them this their insolent behavior, and put an end to the sedition. And when he had given rewards to the Jews out of the rich spoils he had gotten, and had returned them thanks, as the cause of his victory, he sent them away to Jerusalem to Jonathan, with an ample testimony of the assistance they had afforded him. Yet did he prove an ill man to Jonathan afterward, and broke the promises he had made, and he threatened that he would make war upon him, unless he would pay all that tribute which the Jewish nation owed to the first kings of Syria. And this he had done, if Trypho had not hindered him, and diverted his preparations against Jonathan to a concern of his own preservation, For he now returned out of Arabia into Syria with the child Antiochus, in age but a youth, and put the diadem on his head. And as the whole forces that had left Demetrius, because they had no pay, came to his assistance, he made war upon Demetrius, and joining battle with him, overcame him in the fight, and took from him both his elephants and the city Antioch. Demetrius, upon this defeat, retired into Cilicia, but the child Antiochus sent ambassadors and an epistle to Jonathan, and made him his friend and confederate, and confirmed to him the high priesthood, and yielded up to him the 4 prefectures which had been added to Judea. Moreover, he sent him vessels and cups of gold, and a purple garment, and gave him leave to use them. He also presented him with a golden button, and styled him one of his principal friends, and appointed his brother Simon to be the general over the forces, from the ladder of Tyre unto Egypt. So Jonathan was so pleased with these grants made him by Antiochus, that he sent ambassadors to him and to Trypho, and professed himself to be their friend and confederate, and said he would join with him in a war against Demetrius, informing him that he had made no proper returns for the kindness he had done him, for that when he had received many marks of kindness from him, when he stood in great need of them, he, for such good turns, had requited him with further injuries. So Antiochus gave Jonathan leave to raise himself a numerous army out of Syria and Phoenicia, and to make war against Demetrius's generals. Whereupon he went in haste to several cities which received him splendidly indeed, but put no forces into his hands. And when he was come from thence to Ascalon, the inhabitants of Ascalon came and brought him presents, and met him in a splendid manner. He exhorted them, and every one of the cities, and to join with Antiochus, and, in assisting him, to endeavor to punish Demetrius for what offenses he had been guilty of against themselves, and told them there were many reasons for that their procedure, if they had a mind so to do. And when he had persuaded those cities to promise their assistance to Antiochus, he came to Gaza, in order to induce them also to be friends to Antiochus. But he found the inhabitants of Gaza much more alienated from him than he expected, for they had shut their gates against him. And although they had deserted Demetrius, they had not resolved to join themselves to Antiochus. This provoked Jonathan to beseech them and to harass their country. For as he set a part of his army round about Gaza itself, so with the rest he overran their land, and spoiled it, and burnt what was in it. When those of Gaza saw themselves in this state of affliction, and that no assistance came to them from Demetrius, what distressed them was at hand, but what should profit them was still at a great distance, and it was uncertain whether it would come at all or not. They thought it would be prudent conduct to leave off any further continuance with them, and to cultivate friendship with the other. So they sent to Jonathan, and professed they would be his friends, and afford him assistance. For such is the temper of men, that before they have had the trial of great afflictions, they do not understand what is for their advantage. But when they find themselves under such afflictions, they then change their minds, and what it had been better for them to have done, before they had been at all damaged, they chose to do, but not till after they have suffered such damages. However, he made a league of friendship with them, and took from them hostages for their performance of it, and sent these hostages to Jerusalem, while he went himself over all the country, as far as Damascus. And when he had heard that the generals of Demetrius's forces were come to the city of Kadesh with a numerous army, the place lies between the land of the Tyrians and Galilee, for they supposed they should hereby draw him out of Syria, in order to preserve Galilee, and that he would not overlook the Galileans, who were his own people, when war was made upon them. He went to meet them, having left Simon in Judea, who raised as great an army as he was able out of the country, and then sat down before Bethshura, and besieged it, that being the strongest place in Judea. And a garrison of Demetrius's kept it, as we have already related. But as Simon was raising banks, and bringing his engines of war against Bethshura, and was very earnest about sieging it, the garrison was afraid lest the place should be taken of Simon by force, and they put to the sword. So they sent to Simon and desired security of his oath, that they should come to no harm from him, and that they would leave the place and go away to Demetrius. Accordingly he gave them his oath, and ejected them out of the city, and he put therein a garrison of his own. But Jonathan removed out of Galilee, and from the waters which are called Gennesar, for there he was before encamped, and came into the plain that is called Azor, without knowing that the enemy was there. When therefore Demetrius's men knew a day beforehand that Jonathan was coming against them, they laid an ambush in the mountain, who were to assault him on the sudden, while they themselves met him with an army in the plain. Which army, when Jonathan saw ready to engage him, he also got ready his own soldiers for the battle as well as he was able. But those that were laid in ambush by Demetrius's generals being behind them, the Jews were afraid lest they should be caught in the midst, so they ran away in haste, and indeed all the rest left Jonathan. But a few there were, in number about 50, who stayed with him, and with them Mattathias, the son of Absalom, and Judas, the son of Capseus, who were the commanders of the whole army. These marched boldly, and like men desperate, against the enemy, and so pushed them, that by their courage they daunted them, and with their weapons in their hands they put them to flight. And when those soldiers of Jonathan that had retired saw the enemy giving way, they got together after their flight, and pursued them with great violence. And this they did as far as Kadesh, where the camp of the enemy lay. Jonathan, having thus gotten a glorious victory, and slain 2,000 of the enemy, returned to Jerusalem. So when he saw that all his affairs prospered according to his mind, by the providence of God, he sent ambassadors to the Romans, being desirous of renewing. He enjoined the same ambassadors, that, as they came back, they should go to the Spartans, and put them in mind of their friendship and kindred. So when the ambassadors came to Rome, they went into their senate, and said what they were commanded by Jonathan the high priest to say, how he had sent them to confirm their friendship. The senate then confirmed what had been formerly decreed concerning their friendship with the Jews, and gave them letters to carry to all the kings of Asia and Europe, and to the governors of the cities, that they might safely conduct them to their own country. Accordingly, as they returned, they came to Sparta, and delivered the epistle which they had received of Jonathan to them, a copy of which here follows. Jonathan the high priest of the Jewish nation, and the senate, and the body of the people of the Jews, to the ephori, and senate, and people of the Lacedaemonians, send greeting. If you be well, and both your public and private affairs be send greeting. If you be well, and both your public and private affairs be agreeable to your mind, it is according to our wishes. We are well also. When in former times an epistle was brought to Onias, who was then our high priest, from Arius, who at that time was your king, by Demoteles, concerning the kindred that was between us and you, a copy of which is here subjoined, we both joyfully received the epistle, and were well pleased with Demoteles and Arius, although we did not need such a demonstration, because we were satisfied about it from the sacred writings, and yet we did not think fit first to begin the claim of this relation to you, lest we should seem too early in taking to ourselves the glory which is now given us by you. It is a long time since this relation of ours to you hath been renewed, and when we, upon holy and festival days, offer sacrifices to God, we pray and victory. As to ourselves, although we have had many wars that have encompassed us around, by reason of the covetousness of our neighbors, yet did not we determine to be troublesome either to you, or to others that were related to us. But since we have now overcome our enemies, and have occasion to send Numenius, the son of Antiochus, and Antipater, the son of Jason, who are both honorable men belonging to our senate, to the Romans, we gave them this epistle to you also, that they might renew that friendship which is between us. You will therefore do well yourselves to write to us, and send us an account of what you stand in need of from us, since we are in all these things disposed to act according to your desires. So the Lacedaemonians received the ambassadors kindly, and made a decree for friendship and mutual assistance, and sent it to them. At this time there were 3 sects among the Jews, who had differing human actions. The one was called the sect of the Pharisees, another the sect of the Sadducees, and the other sect of the Essenes. Now for the Pharisees, they say that some actions, but not all, are the work of fate, and some of them are in our own power, and that they are liable to fate, but are not caused by fate. But the sect of the Essenes affirm that fate governs all things, and that nothing befalls men what is according to its determination. And for the Sadducees, they take away fate, and say there is no such thing, and that the events of human affairs are not at its disposal, but they suppose that all our actions are in our own power, so that we are ourselves the causes of what is good, and receive what is evil from our own folly. However, I have given a more exact account of these opinions in the 2nd book of the Jewish War. But now the generals of Demetrius had gathered a greater army together than they had before, and came against Jonathan. But as soon as he was informed of their coming, he went suddenly to meet them to the country of Hamath, for he resolved to give them no opportunity of coming into Judea. So he pitched his camp at 50 furlongs distance from the enemy, and sent out spies to take a view of their camp, and after what manner they were encamped. When his spies had given him full information, and had seized upon some of them by night, who told him the enemy would soon attack him, he, thus apprised beforehand, provided for his security, and placed watchmen beyond his camp, and kept all his forces armed all night. And he gave them a charge to be of good courage, and to have their minds prepared to fight in the nighttime, if they should be obliged so to do, lest their enemies' designs should seem concealed from them. But when Demetrius's commanders were informed that Jonathan knew what they intended, their counsels were disordered, and it alarmed them to find that the enemy had discovered their intentions. Nor did they expect to overcome them any other way, now they had failed in the snares they had laid for them. For should they hazard an open battle, they did not think they should be a match for Jonathan's army, so they resolved to fly. And having lighted many fires, that when the enemy saw them they might suppose they were still there, they retired. When Jonathan came to give them battle in the morning in their camp, and found it deserted, and understood they fled, he pursued them. Yet he could not overtake them, for they had already passed over the river Eleutheris, and were out of danger. So when Jonathan was returned thence, he went into Arabia, and fought against the Nabateans, and drove away a great deal of their prey, and took many captives, and came to Damascus. And the same time it was that Simon his brother went over all Judea and Palestine as far as Ascalon, and fortified the strongholds. And when he had made them very strong, both in the edifices erected, and in the garrisons placed in them, he came to Joppa. And when he had taken it, he brought a great garrison into it, for he heard that the people of Joppa were disposed to deliver up the city to Demetrius's generals. When Simon and Jonathan had finished these affairs, they returned to Jerusalem, where Jonathan gathered all the people together, and took counsel to restore the walls of Jerusalem, and to rebuild the wall that encompassed the temple, which had been thrown down, and to make the places adjoining stronger by very high towers, and besides that, to build another wall in the midst of the city, in order to exclude the marketplace from the garrison which was in the citadel, and by that means to hinder them from any plenty of provisions, and moreover to make the country much stronger and more defensible than they were before. And when these things were approved of by the multitude, as rightly proposed, Jonathan himself took care of the building that belonged to the city, and sent Simon away to make the fortresses in the country more secure than formerly. But Demetrius passed over Euphrates, and came into Mesopotamia, as desirous to retain that country still, as well as Babylon. And when he should have obtained the dominion of the upper provinces, to lay a foundation for recovering his entire kingdom. For those Greeks and Macedonians who dwelt there frequently sent ambassadors to him, and promised that if he would come to them, they would deliver themselves up to him, and assist him in fighting against Arsaces, the king of the Parthians. So he was elevated from these hopes, and came hastily to them, as having resolved, that if he had once overthrown the Parthians, and gotten an army of his own, he would make war again. And the people of that country received him with great alacrity. So he raised forces, with which he fought against Arsaces, and lost all his army, and was himself taken alive, as we have elsewhere related. Chapter 6. How Jonathan was slain by treachery, and how thereupon the Jews made Simon their general and high priest. What courageous actions he also performed, especially against Trypho. Now when Trypho knew what had befallen Demetrius, he was no longer firm to Antiochus, but contrived by subtlety to kill him, and then take possession of his kingdom. But the fear that he was in of Jonathan was an obstacle to this his design, for Jonathan was a friend to Antiochus, for which cause he resolved first to take Jonathan out of the way, and then to set about his design relating to Antiochus. But he, judging it best to take him off by deceit and treachery, came from Antioch Jonathan out of the way, and then to set about his design relating to Antiochus. But he, judging it best to take him off by deceit and treachery, came from Antioch to Bethshan, which by the Greeks is called Scythopolis, at which place Jonathan met him with 40,000 chosen men, for he thought that he came to fight him. But when he perceived that Jonathan was ready to fight, he attempted to gain him by presents and kind treatment, and gave order to his captains to obey him, and by these means was desirous to give assurance of his good will, and to take away all suspicions out of his mind, that so he might make him careless and inconsiderate, and might take him when he was unguarded. He also advised him to dismiss his army, because there was no occasion for bringing it with him when there was no war, but all was at peace. However, he desired him to retain a few about him, and go with him to Ptolemais, for that he would deliver the fortresses that were in the country under his dominion. And he told him that he came with those very designs. Yet did not Jonathan suspect anything at all by this his management, but believed that Trypho gave him this advice out of kindness, and with a sincere design. Accordingly, he dismissed his army, and retained no more than 3,000 of them with him, and left 2,000 in Galilee. And he himself with 1,000 came with Trypho to Ptolemais. But when the people of Ptolemais had shut their gates, as it had been commanded by Trypho to do, he took Jonathan alive, and slew all that were with him. He also sent soldiers against those 2,000 that were left in Galilee, in order to destroy them. But those men having heard the report of what had happened to Jonathan, they prevented the execution. And before those that were sent by Trypho came, they covered themselves with their armor, and went away out of the country. Now they gave them no disturbance, but returned back to Trypho. But when the people of Jerusalem heard that Jonathan was taken, and that the soldiers who were with him were destroyed, they deplored his sad fate. And there was earnest inquiry made about him by everybody, and a great and just fear fell upon them, and made them sad, lest, now they were deprived of the courage and conduct of Jonathan, the nations about them should bear them ill will. And as they were before quiet on account of Jonathan, they should now rise up against them, and by making war with them, should force them into the utmost dangers. And indeed what they suspected really befell them, for when those nations heard of the death of Jonathan, they began to make war with the Jews as now destitute of a governor. And Trypho himself got an army together, and had intention to go up to Judea, and make war against its inhabitants. But when Simon saw that the people of Jerusalem circumstances they were in, he desired to make a speech to them, and thereby rendered them more resolute in opposing Trypho when he should come against them. He then called the people together into the temple, and thence began thus to encourage them. O my countrymen, you are not ignorant that our father, myself, and my brethren have ventured to hazard our lives, and that willingly, for the recovery of your liberty. Since I have therefore such plenty of examples before me, and we of our family have determined with ourselves to die for our laws and our divine worship, there shall no terror be so great as to banish this resolution from our souls, nor to introduce in its place a love of life and a contempt of glory. Do you therefore follow me with alacrity whithersoever I shall lead you, as not destitute of such a captain as is willing to suffer, and to do the greatest things for you. For neither of such a captain as is willing to suffer, and to do the greatest things for you. For neither am I better than my own brethren, that I should be sparing of my own life, nor so far worse than they, as to avoid and refuse what they thought the most honorable of all things. I mean, to undergo death for your laws, and for that worship of God which is peculiar to you. I will therefore give such proper demonstrations as will show that I am their own brother, and I am so bold as to expect that I shall avenge their blood upon our enemies, and deliver you all with your wives and children from the injuries they intend against you, and, with God's assistance, to preserve your temple from destruction by them. For I see that these nations have you in contempt, as being without a governor, and that they thence are encouraged to make war against you. By this speech of Simon he inspired the multitude with courage, and as they had been before dispirited to a good hope of better things, insomuch that the whole multitude of the people cried out all at once that Simon should be their leader, and that instead of Judas and Jonathan his brethren, he should have the government over them. And they promised that they would readily obey him in whatsoever he should command them. So he got together immediately all his own soldiers that were fit for war, and made haste in rebuilding the walls of the city, and strengthening them by very high and strong towers, and sent a friend of his, one Jonathan, the son of Absalom, to Joppa, and gave him order to eject the inhabitants out of the city, for he was afraid lest they should deliver up the city to Trypho, but he himself stayed to secure Jerusalem. But Trypho removed from Ptolemais with a great army, and came into Judea, and brought Jonathan with him in bonds. Simon also met him with his army at the city of Adida, which is upon a hill, and beneath it lie the plains of Judea. When Trypho knew that Simon was by the Jews made their governor, he sent to him, and would have imposed upon him by deceit and treachery, and desired, if he would have his brother Jonathan released, that he would send him 100 talents of silver, and 2 of Jonathan's sons as hostages, that when he shall be released, he may not make Judea revolt from the king. For that at present he was kept in bonds on account of the money he had borrowed of the king, and now owed it to him. But Simon was aware of the craft of Trypho, and although he knew that if he gave him the money he should lose it, and that Trypho would not set his brother free, and withal should deliver the sons of Jonathan to the enemy, yet because he was afraid that he should have a calumny raised against him among the multitude as the cause of his brother's death, if he neither gave the money nor sent Jonathan's sons, he gathered his army together and told them that the offers were ensnaring and treacherous, and yet that it was more eligible to send the money and Jonathan's sons than to be liable to the imputation of not complying with Trypho's offers, and thereby refusing to save his brother. Accordingly, Simon sent the sons of Jonathan and the money. But when Trypho had received them, he did not keep his promise, nor set Jonathan free, but took his army and went about all the country, and resolved to go afterward to Jerusalem by way of Idumea, while Simon went over against him with his army, and all along pitched his own camp over against his. But when those that were in the citadel had sent to Trypho, and besought him to make haste and come to them, and to send them provisions, he prepared his cavalry as though he would be at Jerusalem that very night. But so great a quantity of snow fell in the night, that it covered the roads, and made them so deep, that there was no passing, especially for the cavalry. This hindered him from coming to Jerusalem. Whereupon Trypho removed thence, and came into Celesyria, and falling vehemently upon the land of Gilead, he slew Jonathan there. And when he had given order for his burial, he returned himself to Antioch. However, Simon sent some to the city Basca to bring away his brother's bones, and buried them in their own city Modin, and all the people made great lamentation over him. Simon also erected a very large monument for his father and his brethren, of white and polished stone, and raised it a great height, and so it was to be seen a long way off, and made cloisters about it, and set up pillars, which were of 1 stone apiece, a work it was wonderful to see. Moreover, he built 7 pyramids also for his parents and his brethren, one for each of them, which were been preserved to this day. And we know that it was Simon who bestowed so much zeal about the burial of Jonathan, and the building of these monuments for his relations. Now Jonathan died when he had been high priest 4 years, and had been also the governor of his nation. And these were the circumstances concerning his death. But Simon, who was made high priest by the multitude, on the very first year of his high priesthood, set his people free from their slavery under the Macedonians, and permitted them to pay tribute to them no longer. Which liberty and freedom from tribute they obtained after 170 years of the kingdom of the Assyrians, which was after Seleucus, who was called Nicator, got the dominion over Syria. Now the affection of the multitude toward Simon was so great, that in their contracts one with another, and in their public records, they wrote, "In the first year of Simon the benefactor and ethnarch of the Jews, for under him they were very happy, and overcame the enemies that were round about them. For Simon overthrew the city Gazara, and Joppa, and Jamnis. He also took the citadel of Jerusalem by siege, and cast it down to the ground, that it might not be any more a place of refuge to their enemies when they took it, to do them a mischief, as it had been till now. And when he had done this, he thought it their best way, and most for their advantage, to level the very mountain itself upon which the citadel happened to stand, that so the temple might be higher than it. And indeed, when he had called the multitude to an assembly, he persuaded them to have it so demolished, and this by putting them in mind what miseries they had suffered by its garrison and the Jewish deserters, and what miseries they might hereafter suffer, in case any foreigner should obtain the kingdom, and put a garrison into that citadel. This because he exhorted them to do nothing but was for their own good. So they all set themselves to the work, and leveled the mountain, and in that work spent both day and night without any intermission, which cost them 3 whole years before it was removed, and brought to an entire level with the plain of the rest of the city. After which the temple was the highest of all the buildings, now the citadel, as well as the mountain whereon it stood, were demolished. And these actions were thus performed under Simon. End of Book 13, chapters 5 and 6.